for any questions he might have.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, what's the IRS done to restore an element of fairness to the tax system, and are there any new compliance push that you are aware of to audit high-income earners and big corporations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. See, what happened in the period before the Inflation Reduction Act, when IRS funding was low and we weren't making the appropriate investments, is there's a variety of different areas we fell behind. And one of the key areas we fell behind is the ability to assess complex returns. So in situations where taxpayers had the means to hire an army of lawyers or an accountants to create a lot of complexity in their return and potentially shield income, we weren't making the appropriate investments to track that, assess it, and collect it. And now we are doing just that. With the Inflation Reduction Act resources, we are focused on building our capacity around how to deal with complex returns and how to make sure there's fairness. Because if you're a taxpayer who can't afford to hire a lawyer or an accountant to help you create complexity and shield your income, then you would likely be very frustrated if those that did have the resources could do that and evade what they owe. And we have to close that gap, and we're making really important progress already in closing that gap.
Thanks. And Commissioner, let's talk about data security. I thought your answer and your introductory comments was on target. You want to talk about data security and the improvements that have been made in your time as Commissioner?
Yeah, I mentioned how important, in the answer to Mr. Chairman's question, data security is to the IRS. It is fundamental to what we do in ensuring the public trust. When I got to the IRS, one of the first things I did in March of 2023 was pull the team in together and ask, what is the state of our data security environment? And what I learned was there were a lot of gaps. And one of the primary causes of those gaps was lack of investment. The underfunding that had occurred for many years at the IRS, I said, decreased our capacity in a variety of different ways. And one of those ways was to keep pace with investing in the type of technology, process change, controls to make sure that our environment was secure. And we have spent the last year working diligently to close those gaps. And there is a long laundry list of steps we have taken to completely dramatically change our environment. And I'll point out one important one. The Inspector General, in evaluating our security environment, pointed specifically to a lack of audit trails in our system so that we can see how data is moving throughout the organization and we can track and see if it's moving in an inappropriate way. I required, and it's now been implemented, that every sensitive system in the IRS has the very robust audit trails that the Inspector General required. Again, before the Inflation Reduction Act, we didn't have the resources to put in the work to close these gaps. And that's why it is so important that the IRS be funded adequately for its operations, not just so that we can answer the phone when people call us, not so that we can keep pace with complex returns, but we need to invest in our infrastructure and invest in our data security so events like what happened in 2017 to 2020, that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I don't understand the logic that sometimes is offered that if we cut the IRS, then somehow we're going to improve compliance. The logic escapes me. So let me give you some time here. You've got a minute and 15 seconds to talk about some of the other additions to your testimony that you might like to offer.
Absolutely. So I really want to amplify this point about what a funded IRS means versus what it doesn't. And we have all the evidence we need in looking at the state of the IRS before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed versus where it is today. And before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, our walk-in centers around the country were closed or understaffed with lines around the block. And now, just a few years later, we've opened 50 new walk-in centers. They're fully staffed. We're extending hours to Saturday for people who can't get to us during the week. And we're implementing what we call pop-up walk-in centers, going to remote populations. So if people want to see us in person, they now can. A second example is with the phones. We were understaffed by thousands of phone assisters because of underfunding. What did we do with the funding? We hired 5,000 phone assisters, put them in the call center, and between before the Inflation Reduction Act and after, there was a dramatic change in our ability to answer the phone and help taxpayers with their questions. And the same is true for digital. We have a whole generation of taxpayers that is going to expect, as they should, to be able to do everything they ever wanted to do with the IRS without calling us, without going into our walk-in centers. And before we were funded, our technology tools were stagnant. They weren't being updated in the way you would see either other tax jurisdictions around the world or in the financial services sector and the retail sector. That's all changing now. We have work to do, but now every time taxpayers come to be with the IRS and filling out their taxes or answering a question, when they go to our website each filing season, they're going to see a new set of tools, new functionality, new things that they can do without ever calling us or walking into a walk-in center, because we're investing and focusing our investments on how do we best serve taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Buchanan's recognized.